How's it going, everybody? We're back after a bit of a unintended hiatus. We had a vehicle run into a internet service pole here last week on the day that I was going to initially do this interview with Carlos Cardona, and so that was super unfortunate. But we're back now. We've managed to get it sorted out, and this is a conversation that I've been really looking forward to having for a while. Something that I always feel like is important is I've spent a lot of time on this stream talking about economic and class dynamics, and there's a whole other dimension of things that I think folks need to understand and reckon with, and including myself, because as I've tried to say before, I'm always learning as we do this, and it's always important to bring more voices into the conversation. And Carlos is doing amazing work right now with New Hampshire Progressive Coalition at the same time as he's running for state rep up in Laconia, and I really wanted to have him on to sort of just talk about some of this bigger picture while still in the state stuff. So right now I'm really excited to bring on Carlos Cardona. Here he is. Carlos, welcome to the stream. It's so nice to have you finally. We've been talking about it for a little bit, so
thank you for having me, Carter. It's an honor to be on your show, locally sourced. I'm very proud that New Hampshire has a voice for progressive values.
Hey, I'm out here trying. I'm certainly not a perfect voice, but I think it's always important, and I think I always try to, it's like we have such, I guess, center right media here in the state, and it can be very self-righteous in terms of we're objective, and but if you look at the union leaders' editorials, it's kind of okay, guys. So, and I know that you've had your own very difficult experiences with that particular publication. But yeah, it's just, I'm so happy to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. We have sunny, beautiful weather. I live on Lake Opeechee, out of the 3 lakes in Laconia. So after the interview, I'm going to go and enjoy my backyard and the weather while we're still quarantining for COVID, which I take extremely serious. The lives of others and the people that we serve are utmost important. So I will continue to lead by example on that. But I will definitely be enjoying the weather on my backyard while watching the lake from my house. New Hampshire is a beautiful state, and I'm sure
really is.
People that don't know Laconia should know it's the city on the lakes. We're surrounded by 3 beautiful lakes. I couldn't have chosen a better place to live. You can't choose family or where you're born, but you can definitely choose your friends, and you can definitely choose where you decide to live. And
yeah,
I'm glad that I've been here for 14 years, and I have an amazing network of support that has been very supportive. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you've definitely been super involved. I mean, it's always really encouraging to see the work that you're doing, and especially where you're at. You know what I mean? It's it's just, yeah. As somebody who's sort of always kind of trying to keep tabs on things, it gives me a lot of faith and hope for the future of progressive politics in New Hampshire. You know what I mean? Which can feel bleak at certain moments and really powerful in others. So to that end, I guess I wanted to start by asking you to just sort of tell us about the New Hampshire Progressive Coalition and some of the overarching themes and policies that you would say would define a candidate that would be part of that movement, or be included in that coalition. And I guess, how much viability do you think, or do you feel that the movement behind it has in shifting sort of the long-standing center to center right political leaning that I just spoke about, not just in media, but in the political system of New Hampshire itself?
That's a great question. First of all, I want to give some background as to why the New Hampshire Progressive Coalition exists. when I first started running for office in 2007 and becoming the youngest elected official in the state and the first Hispanic Democrat elected to office, apparently there was a Republican Hispanic at one point elected in the state. So I'm not the first, but definitely most likely probably the first Hispanic that actually truly represents our values as Latinos here on the state. But when I first ran, I ran as a writing candidate and won by 46 votes. And that was a huge lesson for me, that the lack of support that there is for one, minorities, and two, for people that think differently than the parties that we have established. So I thought that it was very important as I was running and learning all these lessons, which I came to the conclusion this year, that progressives need a place where we can meet, gather, and speak our minds and discuss ideas and explore subjects and issues that are sometimes controversial, maybe in the eye of the parties that are in the system. So, and also what's most important, organizing. Progressives didn't really have organizations that were organizing them here in the state and putting them together and under one banner. And we are all different. We're as diverse as the rainbow when it comes to issues and backgrounds. But what's most important is that we learn to speak to each other. Something that I found in the past is that progressives, as progressives, and I'll speak to that, that we sometimes tend to have firing squads instead of learning and understanding each other. So when this idea came was because I ran for DNC member here in the state, and I ran against a very pro-establishment candidate who was deeply entrenched in party politics. And as progressives, we truly believe that we need to get younger representation, minority representation, and of course, money out of politics, which it was key for me. So when I threw my name in there, was with the belief that I wanted to break the ice, and we did just that. As soon as I lost, which it was not shocking, but we were very happy how close we got, because at first everybody thought I was crazy to even throw my name. And because of the margins were so close, we realized that a lot of people felt the way I did, and our supporters. So we got allies that we never thought were there in politics. So what we decided to do was to talk further about this and how do we wanted to move forward. So after so many people reaching out, they're like, we need to keep organizing. We need to challenge the status quo at every corner of politics, because this is how we're going to implement our policies and make our state better. And so that's how this came about. So the board, which are the founding members of this coalition, we got together, got our heads together, and they're all from all over New Hampshire. This board is more diverse than any board I know in the state of New Hampshire. They're young and young at heart, great with policies, great skills when it comes to the internet, great on social media to spread message, and very well versed in the networks of what it is New Hampshire politics, which can be a circus at times. So we decided to go ahead, and as we were marching to form this coalition, things just came together, and more people were joining us. At Sweet Stand, we have about over 100 very active members, but we're in the process of expanding to include another New Hampshire Progressive Alliance. So we're about to merge, which the New Hampshire Progressive Coalition will have, by that point, we'll have over 1,000 members in the state of New Hampshire, which will make us one of the biggest coalitions in the state leading policy. So to me, I never dreamed that our coalition would be this big, but I hope that it would, so that we can benefit the families that we served in our communities. Oftentimes I hear outside of Concord, Manchester areas that these rural city and towns are left behind. And this is what the Progressive Coalition is. It's about making sure that every voice is heard in this system that sometimes may seem bleak, as you stated, or in my opinion, sometimes can be corrupt or already predetermined. Which oftentimes in politics, we find that people are afraid to speak up. So I want to empower people to not be afraid to speak up. Doesn't matter who it is. And at some point, I'll be in that seat too. I'll be in that seat where people will have to speak against something that I say, and I want people to feel empowered. No amount of followers or status in politics should determine, or who should determine the outcome of a policy. or a political system. It should be people determined. And I've always been pro that. And that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. And so far, I'm really excited. We've endorsed amazing candidates. Last night, we released, we're starting to get into very heated races, which I've never been shy of controversy in the state of New Hampshire. I'm not afraid to speak my mind and pick a fight. I know how to handle those, and we have an amazing team that is ready to fight for progressive values like we've never fought before. In the past, has been lone wolves throughout the state fighting for policy, but that type of politics in the state of New Hampshire is over as we know it. And I do have to report back that the establishments, plural, um, are aware that this is happening, and a lot of them are shaken. A lot of them are nervous what this would mean for their power. And my message to them is, we're coming for you. We're coming for your seat. We're coming for your position. If you're not progressive, if you do not change the way you do politics, we will gladly take that from you and make sure that we implement the policies that are going to benefit people. So we are unapologetic. We're definitely respectful, but it does not mean that we can't stand our ground and fight for what we believe in. And that's what we're trying to do here. I feel very passionate about this. A perfect example was when I hosted all the presidential candidates. That is exactly what we're going to do with the Progressive Coalition. This is a nonpartisan coalition that will be focusing on progressive policies. So if for some reason down the road, we happen by some miracle find a Republican that believes in what we believe in, then so be it. America is where it is, and this is coming from a Puerto Rican's perspective. America is where it is because we continue to be tribal, because we continue to follow policies and politics in a tribal way instead of putting people first. So at this point, we're ready to do all the work necessary to overhaul the system that has been left to us. And that's how we're going to have to do it. And for many of us, this is a life or death situation. As a Hispanic, I face a lot of discrimination. Black people are facing a lot of discrimination. So it's a life death situation. As a gay man, we face death threats all the time when we run in politics. So it is super important that we do not be apologetic about this, that we do not stand down, that we continue to be, even if we have to be aggressive at times, to push our policies, because this is a life or death situation for a lot of people here in the Granite State. And I'll speak even further. This is a life or death situation to middle class families and to young families in the state and low income families in our state that unfortunately the system has rigged economically to keep people, as I call it, economically enslaved. Slavery did not end. Slavery just changed what it looked like. And at the beginning of slavery here in America, which I'm sure you have a lot to say about this, slavery just basically was whites against black, and basically the poor were made to believe that black people were the enemy, and so that's how it kept transforming. And now corporations have led the charge and changed what slavery looks like once again in this century. And they have said, well, now it's just poor people against us, and we have to keep them enslaved. Otherwise, they're going to tell us what to do. And that's what unions represent to me. Like, we're going to start telling corporations pretty soon how they're going to behave. And I feel the momentum. I feel, and to answer your question about how do I feel about the state of progressive politics, it's never been better. When Bernie Sanders dropped out, a lot of us, I was a Bernie guy, a lot of us were heartbroken. I know a lot of my brothers and sisters that supported Warren or Julian Castro. When he dropped out, or Andrew Yang or Tulsi, when they dropped out, they felt a sense of loss. But I think those vacuums sometimes are important. They're not always negative. People like ourselves will rise up and fill in those gaps that those great leaders left behind so that we can continue to torch. And I think that's exactly what's happened here in the state of New Hampshire. A lot of us have just came up and they're like, we're going to stand up and fill in, not fill in, but we're going to like do what we can to continue to march with this movement. And you're seeing that across the country. I know this is not New Hampshire related, but I have to highlight the fact how many races we won as progressives in the state of Texas last night. It tells you
Yes.
something about the nation as a whole. Low income and middle class families and business owners across America are realizing that the system has been rigged against us, and they're starting to wake up. So I think this is a great movement. Even if our presidential politics doesn't currently represent us, we have to look back at history. History repeats itself over and over in our history books, which are not always accurate, but
Right. Yeah.
that's another subject.
Yeah,
Just
that's
to
definitely
one of the biggest things is you can tell where America is by how the ground is feeling. And, you could tell this in 2008, and you can tell that to a bigger degree this time around. You can see with the protests of Black Lives Matter, you could see it with elections like in Texas last night. A good friend of mine, Donna Iman, she won her election against an establishment Democrat. I was so proud because I've been able to see her grow as a candidate since last year as I was hosting presidential candidates. And I'm just so proud that she did so well. So we're seeing this across the country, in Mitch McConnell's primary, we can well, in his election, the Democrat side, we came really close to unseating what it seemed like an impossible seat. We just have to realize we've been beat down for so long that I think we lost some confidence over the years.
yeah.
Um, but I think we're gaining that confidence back, and I'm super excited. And nobody should look at Warren stepping down, or Bernie Sanders, or Andrew Yang, or Tulsi, or Julian Castro as a defeat of any sort. We should look at as a this is just the beginning of a big battle brewing here in America for the soul of America, for people in America, for the working class.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
you're seeing that.
Yeah, and I think, that's a really good point, and something that I kind of felt more recently was that, especially with um if you go and look at like the three founders of Black Lives Matter, um and I think, I think Patrice Cullors does a very good job. All three are incredible when they address it, but I think Patrice has this really interesting way of, because of her own personal experience with her brother, of honing in and discussing sort of the dynamic of intersectionality, and also the class dynamic, this thing that sort of like the economics of it that hit us all. And I think, like, I look at what Black Lives Matter is doing, and I think they're really like, they're synthesizing in a lot of ways. If you actually go in and look really closely at what's happening in their movement and what they stand for, for anybody who takes the time, I'll make sure to post this afterwards, but I really encourage folks to read the Breathe Act, and look at what that contains, because it's a really good, like, people-oriented synthesis of a lot of the same ideas that we were discussing with the Green New Deal. And I definitely feel like, in the wake of Bernie and Warren and Julian and all these people dropping out, I almost feel like the ideology has grown more substantial and stronger, and it's being understood more by folks, because it's now it's now in the hands of this very decentralized movement that operates off of chapters, and it's motivating rural white communities. I mean, I know we experience it here in my town in Peterborough, where you're activating a whole lot of people that aren't just Black Lives Matter, and or just Black lives, or people of color, or or trans folks. It's like you are actually seeing sort of a more traditional cis white person reflecting and trying to, however much they may stumble, trying to get there and make a difference in their own community and follow along with that. So it's just, I always really appreciate like, to your point, I think it is absolutely growing. It's moving forward. It's like, those candidates dropping out was not the end at all. If anything, it was just the beginning. So
Yeah, the establishment has made us believe that New Hampshire is a lot more conservative than it actually is. I mean,
yeah.
let's think about it. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won by large margins. He won again in 2020. Um, it's not as conservative as it seems, and it's not as pro-establishment as people like to believe. So I think those are two key words here in the state of New Hampshire in politics.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to own those narratives as progressives, and we need to run with them. A perfect example was here in Laconia when I was called and told that that Black Lives Matter wanted to host an event here, a protest slash vigil. I immediately, my mind had two thoughts. One, I was scared for the safety of protesters at first
Mm-hmm.
because white supremacists are very much alive and organized in this county.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a prime target of them, and that's no secret on social media. And two, I was excited. I was like, this is exactly the places that we need to go in America. We don't need to go where it's comfortable to hold a conversation. We need to go where it is uncomfortable. That's how we grow as people, as a country. And so I said, sure, we'll do what we got to do. So we started organizing, and then the day came up, and over 700 people showed up. And in the big picture, if you say that across the country, they're like, that's not a lot of people. In a small city that we are, that was huge. I don't remember when was the last time we had 700 people gathered in the city. And I'm saying over 700. We don't know the correct number. It could have been 1,000, but I don't remember when was the last time we had that many people in one location here in our city talking about any given subject or issue. So I saw a lot of neighbors that I never thought would agree with me on Black Lives Matter. They were there to support and show and basically use their privilege to lift Black lives. And the other thing that was very fundamental for me here that I was like very moved by, it's not just that we talked about Black Lives Matter, we also talked about Black Trans Lives Matter. And
Yes.
to me, that was very touching. I couldn't believe that my city was having this conversation and it was embracing the change that is coming and sweeping our country. So I was very excited because as chairman of the Laconian Democrats, to me, like I felt really good in my home city. I felt like, wow, we are changing, we are evolving, and we're accepting our mistakes from our past. And I had neighbors that I never thought I agree with on these things, and they were there, and they made sure that I knew that they were there. And
Yeah.
to me, that was powerful. It showed that Black Lives Matter is not only benefiting Black Lives Matter, but it's benefiting all of us
Right.
because when Black Lives Matter, we basically all matter. You know what I mean? It's
Yes,
basically,
exactly.
and that's what the whole point is. People that see it the opposite way obviously don't get what Black Lives Matter is all about.
Right.
And as a Latino, to have our Black brothers and sisters fighting for all of us, it's huge. So it was a great day here in Laconia, and it's even pushing my opponents to double think what they're going to say. So it's a victory for us. So the state of politics in New Hampshire, I think next presidential politics will be a reflection of how progressive we're moving New Hampshire. Every single day, I'm hearing from somebody new in New Hampshire politics that they're like, "What is the New Hampshire Progressive Coalition all about? How can I join? I'm kind of sort of in the closet progressive, but I want to come out. I want to embrace
Right.
what I believe in, what I've always thought that was right." And that's okay too. There's people that are in those positions. But I'm super excited that we're enabling people to speak up and for what's right. So,
Yeah, well, and I think something else that helps too is that there's visibly it's I always feel like the like what I would consider to be the progressive left has always kind of felt very much so on the back foot. Like if you go all the way back to the 70s, and even further, that it's and you can see it in sort of like in Chomsky's writings sometimes, where it's like there was never necessarily a full understanding of like, okay, what do we do when we have power, right? Like what do we do
yeah.
with that power? How do we wield that power? And I think something that I notice is so moves this forward so much is now we have, you know, strong progressive values that are backed by, here's what we're going to do when we actually have that power. Here's what we plan on seeking out. And it's also, it's in a way it is so nonpartisan because it's focused on a top and bottom type of an understanding more so than it is a left or a right. And it's for me, it always highlights the actual conditions that we've been subjected to, right? Like
Yeah.
here in New Hampshire, I think one of the main things is the way we fund stuff, whether it's the tax structure or available housing. That's mental health services, things like that. That while they don't necessarily handle the racial or more identity based component, it's important to create those services and understand it in that way, and for progressives to be able to express that adequately and paint an actual alternative to what we have now, so that we can create the base equity that's necessary to really and not that it needs to precede it should all happen simultaneously, but to create the equity that's required in order to really get everybody on the same page.
Yeah. New Hampshire is a perfect example of the class struggle here in America. The perfect symptom is how we fund things, education. I was in AmeriCorps for 3 years here in our district, and I often saw Laconia as one of the most underfunded cities in the state of New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was learning about how we fund education here in New Hampshire, I quickly realized how unfair it was. So we're basically, it's a property tax based system, which it's unfair because then it keeps young families out of owning a home. It keeps the elderly from staying in their homes and retiring and living their lives in their home. And so I quickly realized how unfair that system was. And that's when I started getting involved in politics and running, because I realized that something needed to be said. And I didn't realize how fundamental that would be for the progressive movement back in 2007, but it's literally what we're talking about today.
Right.
Literally, our gubernatorial candidates are speaking about this. You have Chris Sununu, who's defending the way we discriminate, our tax system discriminates here in the state. And then you have two Democrat candidates arguing with each other as to how do we fund better education system? Do we continue to use the status quo and amend some of the ways we do it? Or do we completely scrap it and say we need to start something different? And to me, that's what progressive values is all about. We're tired of seeing patches to solve big issues. These wounds are a lot deeper, they're a lot bigger, and a little band-aid is not going to fix it. So it's going to require big overhaul of the systems that we have in place. These systems were put in place in an era that was white represented. That doesn't work anymore in our communities, and we're seeing that every single day, from Peterborough to Laconia to Dover, Somersworth to Portsmouth. They're having these conversations. Littleton, New Hampshire, Lincoln, Colebrook, North Country. I was just speaking about this earlier. Pretty much Executive Council District 1 is the poorest in the state. And we should look at why that is. And it's because of the system we have in place that basically dries to the bone those communities from their resources and gives it to the richer communities here in the state. So we need to stop that kind of pattern. And it's going to take progressive leaders to do that. Moderates are not making the argument for change. They're just keeping the status quo. Yeah. Republicans are fighting to dry those communities even more, to the point that people don't want to live there. So it's going to be up to progressives to change the system. We are what's different in this equation. I was in Jeffrey, New Hampshire last week. I took a drive up there because it's beautiful and it's far enough that I felt like I'm in the middle of nowhere and I'll be okay. And we went to see the wilderness there, and 1,000 people live there in a city that at one point was considered the frontier of New Hampshire and a place that was going to grow out of proportion.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, the 1800s. Now it's 2020, and the city's stuck at 1,000 population.
Right.
an area that is beautiful. And the reason is people move where there are resources, where there is good schools, where there's good drinking water, where there is good departments that they can take care of the population so that they can continue to thrive, where there are good jobs. And
Yeah.
there's none. There's none. And we have a governor that is still in place that gives tax break to his company instead of towns that are really struggling and need it, such as Franklin, New Hampshire, that is a depressed area, or anywhere in the western part of New Hampshire and the border between Vermont that sometimes struggles. We got to think outside the box, and unfortunately, the moderates and the conservatives are not doing that. We've tried their ways; it hasn't worked. It's not working. It won't work because it's not. Nothing has changed, and it won't change.
Right.
So I say for those that are questioning progressive values, give us a try. You'll see that it works.
Yeah.
This is the other thing. The progressive movement relies heavily on science and fact, good math.
Yes.
So numbers work. Numbers are what they are, and I think that's a strong value of progressives. And I'm very excited to be part of the movement. I'm glad that I found a home and that we were all able to connect together and build each other up and build communities that we can be proud of. So.
Right. So I want to, like, I really appreciate all the policy conversation because I think it's really like it is kind of in a way it's a bedrock of us as a state getting out of this. But I also kind of want to address the community and the feeling and the emotional aspects of it. So, as somebody who has inevitably, and as you've expressed, experienced a sense of othering for your identity, um, regardless of whether it's how like what part of your identity it is, what would you express to folks who might consider themselves to be on the team, who engage unwittingly in acts of othering, but find themselves really defensive in that moment when they're confronted, whether it's whether they're feeling confronted inwardly or if it's outwardly in a public space, with having engaged in reinforcing something, an institution that they otherwise feel like they're against, or like or at trying very hard to act in opposition to.
I'm going to sound like a therapist for a minute, even though I'm not.
Sure, that's okay.
Feelings, you're entitled to your feelings and your
Mm-hmm.
opinion, and it's good to explore those. It's good to dig deep and have those inner conversations or outwardly conversations, as uncomfortable as they may be. I'll give you a perfect example of what you're speaking of, and I hate to admit it because this is not who I am, but there is discrimination rooted in everybody. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, if you're white, black, Latino, Asian. There's discrimination in all communities, and it doesn't make it right, and it's not an excuse. But it's good to have those conversations. Last week we had a town hall / forum with Stonewall Democrats, the LGBTQ caucus of the
Mm-hmm.
Democratic Party, which I'm a member of, and the Black Lives Matter movement from Nashua and Manchester. And as we were having an amazing conversation of intersectionality, I was speaking, and I have nieces that are Black, and I used the word mulatto to describe them, not knowing that that was a discriminatory word or an offensive word. And so I was instantly corrected by Black Lives Matter movement and told to basically dig down and find out why that's offensive. Because
Mm-hmm.
it is our job, even though as minorities, we should teach our communities about what is right and wrong. It is also our jobs as human beings to know what we're saying and what we mean, and how we're hurting or offending other people as we live our lives. So in my family, that was a word that was always used. I never thought that there was something wrong with it. And then when that happened, I was shocked. I was a bit, I was sad and hurt because I didn't realize that I was using a word that was so hurtful to people. And as a minority and somebody who has been fighting for equal rights and for minorities across the state, I felt like, wow, what kind of ally am I if I didn't know that? And what kind of like intellectual? Because like I have an education, a background, and like I just felt so lost. For a second, I had lost my identity as a fighter for Black communities. And I had to have a lot of conversations with people that I knew after that to kind of like realize what I did wrong and kind of like just comprehend that conversation and understand it and really just basically understand what they were feeling. And as a person that I love understanding where everybody comes from, I did a lot of research and I realized what the word meant. And for anybody on this call, for context, the word mulatto is a Latin word um, that was basically adopted by Spain and Portuguese to describe people that were half black, half white. Basically, it means a mule. Um, a horse and a donkey get together and they produce a mule, and that's what it means. And once I saw that definition, I was so hurt because I realized how offensive it was. And so that's a perfect example of how our system sometimes, we might find in positions of wanting to defend it because we think we understand what we're saying or what we're doing. But then we dig a little deeper and we realize like how terrible that was. You know, so that's another one is people defending George Washington or any of our founding fathers that were not abolitionists that owned slaves. We see them throughout history as glorified men that stood up for the republic and fought for our civil liberties. But really, at the end of the day, they were no different than a white supremacist guy that wants to put black people in jail or deport them to another country or whatever their ideals or beliefs are. So I think just like I had that deep down conversation with myself to try to realize like what I did wrong and understand it and not do it again. And the reason I'm using the word again is because I want to educate people. I think it's super important. So there is examples like that that are rooted in our system, in our society, that we continue to use that are very discriminatory, that are very just wrong in every general sense. So so basically that's just one example. Our history books is another one. I think as America we are starting to have that conversation, what our history books should look like, and I think still that's at the early stages, but that's another system in place that we need to overhaul
Yeah, definitely.
completely. We glorify slavery, and I think that movie Glory, I think it's called Glory. It's a perfect example of how we glorify slavery and how great of a nation we are because we
Yeah.
included them in a war. And I will go further as a progressive and very left-leaning candidate. The military should not be glorified. That's a source. That's slavery in itself. Poor people are forced to enlist in the military to serve our country, uh, and we use the word honorably to describe those situations when really what we're doing is we're sacrificing our sons and daughters, putting them in harm's way, invading another land that does not belong to us, we have no right to defend or fight for allegedly the protection of American lives. And so that's another system in place that we continue to defend as a nation, that you hear oftentimes people having a conflict, trying to judge or criticize because we've been taught to glorify these systems in place. We've been taught to honor them, and I'm not saying that veterans are not honorable. I think they're amazing human beings that gave the ultimate sacrifice for us. I just think the system that they're serving, unfortunately, has used their goodwill. They're willing to fight for all of us,
Mm-hmm.
and have abused them for economic purposes. We know for a fact, based on budgets, that it has nothing to do with freeing people across the world and bringing democracy about, but instead it has everything to do with making the rich richer and making these industries, military industries, wealthier. Well, I mean, let's think about it. If Boeing is making bombs and planes, and we're not crashing them, the planes,
Hmm.
and we're not bombing countries, then there's no need to buy more.
Right.
So I think that's a simple system right there. So that's another system. A lot of people don't think outside the box with these issues when it comes to racism or discrimination or how we continue to enslave our people economically. But to me, these are issues um, that definitely have been put in place to continue to keep people down economically, racially, and in some cases, even age wise. I mean, think about it. The
Yeah.
military doesn't let you to enlist after a certain age.
Right.
I mean, I know some guys that are in their 50s that are like in much better shape than I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why would we not do it based on health criteria and how well you are physically, but instead we make it based on age? We target communities. A
Hmm.
perfect example in Laconia, you will find very little government agencies, but you'll certainly find a military enlisting office.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's
So you go to poor communities and you see that. The other thing is environmental racism. This is a system that we've been made to defend it. I had no option but to think the other day when my friend Sebastian Fuentes up north in Littleton was advocating to stop this landfill from being made near a lake.
hmm
That's environmental racism. You pick a poor community that might have a few minorities in those areas, force them to live around this landfill because it's the only affordable place for us to live.
Right.
That's just plain and simple wrong. Here in Laconia, a lot of us are forced to live near a state school that is deteriorating, that nothing has been done with that state school property in ages. It's a environmental hazard. It's near a landfill on top of it. It's near our lakes, our drinking water. And you'll find cheaper properties. I literally live like just you can throw a stone and be there.
Hmm.
So we're forced to buy homes near these locations. So environmental racism is another system in place that we often don't talk about. The minorities are forced to live near. Perfect example in Philly. There's a nuclear plant where they literally built right next to it a low income housing,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it just seems so crazy. None of us here in our right mind would love. We would say, "Oh, I want to move there."
Right.
But
Yeah.
low income
Exactly.
families are forced to live there because they have no other option because they have to go and live wherever they are told to that they should live.
Or far away
Um,
from resources. I know that that's like down
oh
south
yeah,
here in the state. That's a huge problem where like some of the most developed towns, I mean like right now we're dealing with a serious housing crisis in Peterborough, which is where a lot of resources are. You got to go like at least 20 minutes in either direction or any direction really to get to the next supermarket. And
yeah.
but you cannot find affordable rentals in this area. You can barely find affordable houses to buy. Um,
Right now, the average rent in Laconia is about $1,400 a month, which
yeah,
is ridiculous. A single mom with kids would never be able to afford that.
right, right,
Um,
exactly.
and the other thing, a perfect example here in New Hampshire, you may not be aware of this, but immigrants that are to get a license,
Hmm.
they have to drive to Concord.
Is
So there's an
that's the only
office in
location?
Nashua.
That's the only
They have an
location.
office.
Like,
It's the only one that will process immigrants for a license in the state of New Hampshire.
wow.
So think about that. If you live in Nashua or Peterborough, that's a long haul. And our communities, our communities need every person they can have in their community to continue to lift the community. So now you're
Especially if you don't
forcing
already have a
immigrants.
license. Like, it's like you're asking somebody to figure out how to get to a place without to get the tool that they need in order to get to the place. That's
So for listeners in this call that may be not from New Hampshire or maybe are from New Hampshire and don't know how far Nashua is from Concord, it's about a good hour, and I'm
yeah,
being generous with my time. Like
yeah.
that's like with my time, like it's an hour and 15 minutes minimum to Concord, and that's like on a no traffic day. So if you happen to have only an appointment for Friday, which is our busiest day on Route 93 on Highway 93, You're talking about a 2 to 3 hour commute one way just to get your license.
Mm-hmm.
New Hampshire has a lot of refugees. We're great that way. We've welcomed refugees from all over the world.
Yes.
I have some friends that are from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, Iraq, like all over, Burma, and now we're forcing these communities to. And I'm learning something new. Instead of saying this community, as politicians and leaders in our community, we should say our community. So I'm going to self-correct myself there. We're forcing our communities to take a 3 hour, 2 hour drive just to get their driver's license. So that right there is a prejudice and an injustice that we have to fix. The other reason why I'm just so devastated by the way the system is in place. We have low-income families that don't have a car. They will never have a car or a driver's license because, for example, here in Laconia, they would have to drive 30 to 45 minutes, whatever way, just to get their license. They can either go to Tamsworth, New Hampshire, or Concord to get their license. So that already, right there, is an example of another situation. So our high school students, maybe they have a single mom that has to work 2 jobs. Like, we're already a rite of passage that most kids consider getting their license around 16, 17 years of age. They won't be able to do it any longer because I was one of those kids. I moved here with nobody. I was homeless and I lived in Franklin, New Hampshire. I had nobody to take me to the DMV. You had to walk. And from Concord, New Hampshire, anybody that doesn't know, it's a half an hour drive. Walking,
Yeah.
and it's like 2.5 hours. So this is what we're forced to do. And New Hampshire has one of the what used to be the number one in the country with the largest homeless youth population in the country. And that's what we're forcing our state, our citizens, into those situations.
Right.
So then when we say, our kids are falling into drugs or, addiction rates increase, this is why. This is why they increase, because we have a system in place that forces them into these positions. Granted, it's not everybody. I know everybody's situation is different.
Mm-hmm.
But in Laconia, where we have the highest rates of drug overdoses, where we have the highest rate of cases right now of people with drug abuse, mental situations, like with Genesis Behavioral Health, this matters. Having a DMV close by matters. I remember when Steve Marchand was running, our first real progressive governor candidate back in the day, in the good old days.
Right.
He would talk about having there's no reason why we can't have stations throughout different communities and rotating them. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there is ways to accomplish. We don't, one of the biggest things that conservatives bring, well, it's going to cost money and it's going to increase like the budgets. I was like, well, it's going to increase our budgets to have people dying from drug overdoses.
Right.
That's 10 times worse. Our budgets increase when homelessness rates are up. Our cases increases when the police is violating people's rights and they're getting sued because
Yeah.
we're using the police for mental health.
Right.
So I think these are the things that we're encountering in the conversations, and we cannot depend on moderates to make the case.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be progressives to lead the way, and I think the moderates eventually will follow. But this is the time to lead, and I'm very passionate about these things because I see it in Belknap County all the time. It's just sad that we have this system in place where it enables injustices to happen and unfairness, and our communities are paying the price. But you still see people struggling, and they still go to work the next day.
Right.
And our communities are not asking. I hate when we use, this is one thing progressives we need to get better. It's marketing. I hate when we use the word free. It's like, it's not freaking free. We're paying our taxes. Like,
right.
This is how we're contributing to society. We should get back. This is our money. We should decide how it's spent. And I think having those mobile stations that get moved throughout the state for people to get their licenses would be very popular, number one. Number two, it could be outdoors. So for COVID-19, it would be a great solution. But something, and I'm going to be I might come across as ageist for a minute, but this is why young people should be leading politics.
Yes,
When
I
young
agree with
people
that.
are given the positions to speak up in leadership, great ideas come about because it's things that new things. And I'm going to be saying this when I'm 50, 60, 70 years old someday, because I know that
Yes.
by then I will have already a pattern that I'm used to thinking. And I know that I'll be set in my ways. But I will also believe that young people will have new ideas that can change life for the better. So I hope I become that old guy that
Right.
embraces young people. And I've had plenty of those in my life. I'm very grateful. So I'm not criticizing that generation, but I think we need to admit that when we allow young people to speak up and get involved in politics, amazing, great ideas come about. And this is just one of them. You know what I mean? Like there's so many things I hear on the campaign trail, people suggesting that we can do that that is very 21st century. And at the same time, great. Another last example I'll give you, because I can talk all day long about all this,
No,
is
that's great.
elections. Elections.
Yes.
New Hampshire has an archaic system. You can only register in person, and depending on the town hall, even though they shouldn't ask you, or city hall, sometimes they'll discriminate against you and ask you for an ID. There is no checks and balances in our election system here in New Hampshire. And I think it's super important that we go into the 21st century. We allow people to register to vote online. People do everything on their phones. So imagine how great, how much more young people will be involved if they can just register on their phone instead of making a line at City Hall, because now you add COVID-19 to it, or you have to make an appointment in some places to go to the City Hall. So it's like, this will be a lot easier and a lot of less stress. So my belief system is that if we upgrade our election system, we will do great. I do believe in paper ballots. I think it's the best way. I always believe in having receipts, having
Yeah.
checks and balances. And I think the paper ballots is fine. I think they work great. And here in New Hampshire, that's a perfect example. There's very little room for error. Um, but when it comes to how people register to vote and how we engage our citizens, um, God, we have holidays for blowing up fireworks. Like
Right.
we can definitely have a holiday to have people take their time to go and vote and do the right thing. And the census is coming around in the communities.
Hmm.
This is how we fund the community. And unfortunately, some people have politicized it, including our president, Donald Trump, by wanting to ask immigration status questions. We're better than this as a country.
Yeah.
And then I guess I'll add one more thing, because I wouldn't be Carlos Cardona if I didn't add this, and that's Puerto Rico.
Yes. Yes. I was hoping that I would hear from you on this. Yeah.
Puerto Rico is the perfect example of a discriminatory racist system.
Yes.
Puerto Rico is quickly gaining the new title, the last colony on Earth. Even though they're technically not the last colony on Earth. There's
Right.
Bermuda and a couple of other places in the world that are owned by different countries. They
Yeah.
don't see themselves as being owned, but that's really, it is what it is. And I think in Puerto Rico is a perfect example of how they dug deep over the past 20 years, especially since Hurricane Maria, and are trying to understand their identity and where is our place on this planet. Like, where do we fit in, who we are. And there's a great book I'm going to recommend to any Puerto Rican that is listening to this call, and to any non-Puerto Rican that wants to learn more about our culture and how we feel when we moved here to mainland, especially New Hampshire. There's a book called When I Was Puerto Rican. And at first it made waves because the title alone suggests that you're no longer Puerto Rican.
Right.
But it should really make you think. For example, I used to be very pro statehood. Like, I was so pro statehood that if you didn't like statehood for Puerto Rico, I wouldn't even acknowledge you, talk to you in politics. I would find you offensive.
Hmm.
And then over time, after I met Bernie Sanders, I learned a lot. It's not for us to determine, including me, what happens to Puerto Rico. That's racist.
Right.
That's discriminatory. That's us, people in mainland, telling the little island what to do.
Hmm.
And that's just wrong. They're entitled to their own future. Puerto Rico, and I correct people on social media all the time because they think they're being kind by saying, I want Puerto Rico to become a state. And I get it. You
Right.
want us to be, you think you're inclusive,
Hmm.
that you're making Puerto Rico part of it. You're not making Puerto Rico part of the conversation. You're not inclusive. You're actually telling Puerto Rico what to do, which is more colonialism, which is wrong. We have led our whole entire history in America by telling people what to do, and we need to stop doing that. We need to stop going to other countries, other places in the world, and telling people how to live their lives if we ourselves don't even know, like, we can't even live our own lives here. Like, we don't even know,
Yes.
like, so so that's number one. Number two, so self-determination for Puerto Rico is important, and we
Hmm.
need to learn to respect, just like we need to learn to respect people's opinion when they say no, stop, those type of things. We need to learn how to respect other people. And Puerto Rico right now is, it's soul searching. It's trying to find out what's best for them, and that's the right thing to do, and I
Right.
respect that. So for anybody out there that is listening, if you're one of those people like I was 2 years ago, I've evolved since I met Bernie. Um, Let Puerto Rico decide for themselves.
Yes.
If you were in Puerto Rico and you're a low income or middle class family, which is like 80% of the island, if Puerto Rico became a state, let me just put it into this context, it would be the poorest state in the country times 10. So we oftentimes look at Mississippi and Alabama as one of our, and Louisiana as our poorest states in the union.
Hmm.
Puerto Rico will be poorer than any of those states. So that's what I want you guys to comprehend what Puerto Rico is like. And yeah, it's beautiful. It's paradise. I love the place. I love
Yeah.
visiting. I love seeing my family. I love the language. I love the culture, the food. There's nothing like it in my eyes. So sorry if you like other types of food, but I love the drinks. There's nothing like a great Puerto Rican Bacardi.
Yeah.
Um, good rum from Puerto Rico, a great coconut from Puerto Rico, a great dessert from Puerto Rico. But our romance with Puerto Rico should not determine how we view the reality of lives and of people there.
Hmm.
We should see it as we're abusing the island. And
Right.
so, as progressives, we need to do better in this conversation because I hear way too many conservatives saying, any progressives saying, I think statehood is great for Puerto Rico. I think that's what should happen. And I was like, do you understand what you're saying? You're telling somebody else like that you has nothing to do with your identity or your intersection in life,
Hmm.
and you're telling them what to do, and that's just wrong. So as a
Right.
Puerto Rican that is living in mainland, I've abstained from here on, like, what to tell Puerto Rico what to do. Um, you know, a lot of people say, well, Puerto Rico could end up like Cuba, and it depends who you ask. Some people like the way Cuba is, and some people don't. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
it
there
could
there are
it could
things
end.
about what Cuba did that were worked very well for it. I mean, look at the amount of doctors Cuba is sending around the world right now because they spent so much effort on public health. Like
Yeah, with
that's I'm
Cuba, like, I relate a lot to Cuba because our flags are very similar. Our food
right.
culture is very similar. I don't think Puerto Rico will become anything like any other island
Right.
because Puerto Rico is very unique in its political beliefs. So I think people would be shocked if Puerto Rico became independent. I think it would be like something new that we haven't seen before. That
Sure.
said, there's many islands in the Caribbean that are independent. You have Dominican Republic, you have Haiti, and they all have different political systems. So I think we use these. My point is, we use these islands to describe, foretell what's going to happen in the future, and I think it's wrong. We wouldn't do that with our kids. We wouldn't do that with our communities. Assume what we're going to become. Uh, so I always hope the best for Puerto Rico, and I always fight for Puerto Rico to have the best
Hmm.
because I believe it's a great place. And of course, that's where I was born, and my roots will always be there. I live, 13, 14 years of my life there. Some of my greatest and some of my tough memories are there. Half of my family's still there.
Hmm.
But if we want to learn to have conversations, we need to learn to respect people to make decisions on their own. And uh, I think we should stop forcing people what kind of political system to believe in. We can make our case by telling our story and how we feel about things,
Hmm.
and people will, you'll be shocked when you let people listen to your story how much it can change their hearts. So when it comes to Puerto Rico, I always say, don't wish them anything except good.
Right.
Just no statehood, no status quo, no independence. Puerto Ricans are more than just a defining status. And to define them by a status is just ridiculous. We wouldn't do that with any other community. Well, there's people in this world that do, but you get my
Well,
point. So
I actually, so to that end, I think it's funny, the what you're describing to me, right, is it seems fairly axiomatic to the problem with majority, like what we would describe as majority white communities, especially here in New Hampshire, trying to deal with and interact with Black Lives Matter and Black activism as a whole, right? So one of the main criticisms that the Black Power movement, going all the way back to Kwame Ture, is like um the people that say they are supportive of Black liberation or Black activism oftentimes decide that what they need to do is they need to tell Black activists, okay, here's what you should do, or here's where you should go about doing it. And one of the primary critiques that they have is sort of like, how is it possible for you to tell me to clean up my yard, or for you to come over and help me clean up my yard, when your yard is a total mess? I.e., white racism is a white problem, and it is essentially on white people to fix it, the same way we need, and to respect the autonomy and the individual power, and to trust the Black community to organize themselves and do what they need to do for themselves. And what we need to do is just show up and listen, and not make suggestions or assumptions about it. Like, I see parallels between that discussion and what you're talking about with Puerto Rico, that there's a sort of similarity there. And it's like, we need to, in the instance of Puerto Rico, and please correct me if this is a mischaracterization, but it seems like we need to examine how, in the mainland United States, we need to examine our own tough interaction with colonialism, right? Like, why do we feel like it's okay for us to be so colonialist? Why do we feel it's okay for us to tell Black activists how they should be activists, when we don't even know ourselves how to do that correctly? I say we, I am speaking for myself as, a white man in this situation, that
yeah,
like, and, to the point of like, I recently had a situation myself where I was at a community meeting, and I, walking away from it, I realized, like, okay, I focused so hard on a class argument that I ultimately made it feel like, and the sort of the inclusivity of trying to say, no, well, we need to remember that we have to include disabled lives, and we have to include trans lives, and LGBTQ, like, as a broad group, and like there's all this other stuff, and I just felt like I didn't want to miss that component. But what happened was, I was effectively, in a way, co-opting, and I never meant to, right? But it was a lack of awareness that was taking it away from the understanding of like what the actual movement itself was. And upon further examination, I realized that, like, absolutely, BLM's primary tenets are many of the things that I'm advocating for. So, and I had that lack of clarity in that moment, or that lack of understanding, that I didn't fully relate. I didn't do the research, and it was not on anybody else to give us the space to do that. It was on us to say, okay, we got to go get our own house in order right now. Like, as as a group of white people sitting around here talking about racial justice and police accountability, this is what's important. And I hear so many of those same, like, paradigms and lessons for the left to internalize, and really, like, it's okay to feel hurt and to need to process that you did that, you know what I mean? Like, and I think, to your point about as we get older, we need to be able to cede our own power and our own responsibility to younger generations, because we have to recognize the way that the aging will entrench us further in our beliefs. And one thing I always hope is that if we hammer on the core belief of we need to listen to and respect younger generations, that's one of those things that we never give up. So at the very least, when we get into that staunch position years out, when we're in our 50s or 60s, that one of the things that we are so staunch about is giving the space to that neck and that trust and that faith to those groups that are coming up and trying to gain voice and power in our system. So
that was powerful, and like so much that went through my mind. So first off, I always want to make it clear, like being Puerto Rican does not make me a person of color. So when I speak, I know my privilege too. Puerto Ricans are mestizo, which means a mixed culture, which is European, white European, African, and Taino, which is Arawak natives from the Caribbean. So that's our ethnicity, like our races. So even though I've done my DNA for like genealogy perspective and reasons, it does not make me Black. So I want to make that crystal clear. So I come to you as a white guy. So when you say we, I inherit that we too, because there are things that our ancestors, our white ancestors, did to the natives in the Caribbean and to Africans in the Caribbean that were just plain and simple wrong and atrocious. And there are a lot of parallels with what Black Lives Matter is going in colonialism, in like what they're fighting, and the colonialism that is happening to the Caribbean by America. So you're not wrong in that sense. And I think, we should just listen as Puerto Ricans fight for what they want. So that's number one. Number two, a perfect example of how, so I'm going to quote my mentor, good friend, Representative Sherry Frost, a great progressive in the state of New Hampshire. If anything, the most progressive state representative I know in the state house, and that'll be controversial. I know I'm going to get some messages about that.
Certainly vocal.
But I have no doubt in my mind, and I will stand by it. I've seen her voting record, and I know, she's a phenomenal historian too. She says history like it is, not like what we want. And she would say power wants power. And we need to realize that as we age, that power wants power. The establishment, the status quo will dig in their heels. So it is super important that we realize that as we grow in politics, as we continue our journey to wherever we're heading as people, and to always be receptive for change. And I think you said it best, to letting new voices and new younger generations lead. I always, when people say, are you too young, or how old are you, implying that I'm too young, I always say, when will I be old enough to lead? When will I be old enough to make decisions for my own life? When will I have paid enough taxes for me to make decisions in our state? And not just me, us. So our young people need to start saying this more often. I'm about to turn 31 years old. Like when I was a young kid, 12 years old, I used to see a 31-year-old as an old guy that worked a lot and should be able to make decisions. So now I'm 31 and I'm still treated like that 12-year-old by people in power. So it's wrong. There was something that was said during the debates, the presidential debates, that was very meaningful to me. It was when Congressman Eric Swalwell said, hello, Vice President, it is time to pass the torch. Our generation is the most underrepresented generation in the whole, anywhere in this country. We are underrepresented everywhere, specifically here in Belknap County. The average age is 65. And we're paying taxes just as much as the 65-year-olds. So it is super important that, we pave way and let young people lead, and what kind of future and communities they see themselves in. And I see young people on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican, starting to lead the way. But I think the older generation needs to do better at allowing us to decide our future. Perfect examples with the Green New Deal. Like, we have 10 years to make anything happen, or this planet is doomed. So it's not fair that that's the kind of system we're going to be left in. Our young people are being left with an economy that they can't even afford a place to live. We're the only species in the whole entire planet that cannot figure out the whole housing crisis. And I'm not trying to compare us to animals or anything like that. But in many ways, I have more admiration for how the animal kingdom does things and how we do it. Like, you know, like, I love bird watching, so I sometimes get controversial with this, but when they're bird nesting, you know, they protect their own home at all costs. And every bird has their nest, you know, and like, we don't have that.
Right.
Our young people don't have that. We have more young people living with their parents still. That would never happen anywhere else. So like, and there are some communities in the world that is not a problem at all. Housing is like so fundamental to their culture. And I think what we were forging America, and I think that's a key word, forging. Think of a blacksmith. While we were forging America and putting this much force into a system, we unfortunately forgot some key details to making this great sword, you know.
Right.
We forgot, you know, that housing matters, health matters. You know, we don't have to look too far to learn from our ancestors, like Native Americans. Health and housing is like their biggest concern and their most important priorities, and they show that in their culture and their communities. And we don't. We as Americans, we have prioritized wealth so much that we have lost track of living life and learning. And I think with COVID-19, a lot of people here in New Hampshire, I hear them saying this, I've realized my priorities. I'm realizing how much I love spending times with my kids and how valuable that is. Or, you know, just cleaning your house and having time to decorate your home, or you're doing your garden. You know, like this year I was able to do a beautiful veggie garden versus before I had to like split between my kids, my partner, my mom who has cancer, work, cleaning the house, like, and possibly putting an okay garden together, you know. And that's how we start living healthier lives. So not trying to get out of the subject here, but yeah, there's a lot of, we need to get our house in order, and we need to be careful when we throw stones in a glass house. It's at least that's a Spanish saying anyway. So
no, I think that's a really good, that's a great thing to add to it. You know what I mean? Is you know, is that consciousness. And I think, you know, like, I definitely, for my own take, and the way I always try to present it to people is, I'm like, hey, you know, like, we operate off of, you know, we talk about how capitalism is so great, and so, you know, like, this is the American way, and what I try to point out to people is, I say, you know, like, look, capitalism is just a slightly graduated version of feudalism, right? Like, it was the idea of, you know, when they land at Plymouth Plantation, it's like, okay, no more, you know, like the king is gone. We don't have a king anymore. Now everyone can be a king. And fundamentally, it's like, no, we shouldn't have kings at all. Like, it only took that sort of like bloodline familial component out, but it didn't take the thing that really drove the problem, which was the money or the resources. It didn't deal with that. It didn't address that at all. And and it's hard, you know, it's like, it's hard to explain to folks that, like, this is the component that's so challenging, you know what I mean? Like, and it's, you know, like, I'm certainly not trying to say like, oh, I'm anti-market, you know what I mean? Like, I'm very pro-market. I don't believe that literally everything should be privatized, you know? And I think it's really important for us as people on the left, as progressives, to look at the historical issues that come along with when the left has had power. It's important for us to inspect what was problematic about Chavez or Mao or Stalin, because you can see that, you know, to your point, power likes power, right? So And that's we're not separate from that just because we like to say that we're for the people, and that we can absolutely continue to perpetuate those same problems. So to me, it's sort of this twofold thing of like, we always have to be assessing and trying to check our own power, and we also have to be trying to assess and check those systems that create the problems for us, and imagine something better at all times, you know?
Yeah. I always say we're no different than religion. We always have somebody that we end up glorifying, that we end up rising too high, and unfortunately that leads to, another king, even if
Right.
you're on the other opposite side. So I think as humans we need to, realize when our time is done, when we
Mm-hmm.
need to just move on from, any political positions. I think that's why term limits are important.
Yes.
The other thing is, and I'll leave it at this, because these conversations have been great, but New Hampshire pays $100 a year to their state representative.
Right.
Um, that enables only the wealthy to be, or the retired person that is getting a check in the mail, to serve,
Mm-hmm.
and it excludes young people from the conversation. So I think it's important that we change that system. I think New Hampshire is going to have a serious conversation as to how we pay professionally our state representatives so that we get better quality. That's why sometimes we end up with more state representative resigning because of controversy. And I'm not saying that money is the solution to everything, but in this case, it would help giving us more quality candidates, and of course, it will make it fair, so that young people can actually go and be elected and not have to work another job or do whatever else they need to, so that they can actually serve the state of New Hampshire. And I know a lot of other young people that are struggling to serve well at the state house because they have to work a full-time job. So
Yeah.
these are
And there's no
conversations that we
child
need to
care.
continue to have. Yeah, no childcare. I mean, there are single parents in this that run for office. I'm not a single parent, but I have two beautiful kids, a 6-month-old and a 4-year-old daughter, and daycare is super important. Like, I want to know that they're going to somewhere where they can be educated. New Hampshire doesn't pay for pre-K. Like, that's $250 on average that parents have to pay a week.
Right.
So it's another expense. So we're not making it easy for young families, or fair. I don't think anybody's asking for a handout or for free. We're asking for fairness so that we can contribute to our society. And I think that's an honorable thing. That's a good thing. And we can do that. I know we can accomplish it. So to progressives out there, when people tell you to defend it, we don't have to defend it, because nobody's asking the conservatives to defend how they spend trillions of dollars in the military. Nobody's
Mm-hmm.
asking the Republicans to defend why you're spending millions of dollars on corporations that don't need the money.
Right.
Nobody's asking conservatives to defend why churches still to this day are tax exempt.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what? We don't need to defend our values. These are our values. We just have to fight for them. We need to continue to find allies, and keep telling our story.
Right.
So that's my message to progressives out there. Come out of your closet with us, and have some fun on the campaign trail. You'd be surprised how many other progressives you'll find along the way. And I'm
Yeah.
very happy to be in this fight with all of you guys.
Awesome. Well, hey, Carlos, I feel like we could go on for hours talking about this stuff, but
Yeah.
I thank you so much for coming on today. I think that was a really nice note to leave it on, and I just like this was such a wide-ranging conversation. It was nice to be able to touch on all this stuff with you. So
Anytime, it'd be my honor to be here, and you'll be hearing, as usual, a lot from me on social media. I'm not
good.
stopping anytime soon. So thank you for all you do. This is, I want you to know that what you're doing is one of the most important things in the state of New Hampshire, to continue to give a voice to progressives all over the state. So I appreciate it, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you so much. And yeah, and to anybody who's, within the coalition or anything like that, if you've got some topics that you want to come on and discuss, I'm happy to do that. And I'd love to set up some more forums and things like that. It had come up at one point, and I think that's great. And any new opportunity that we can seek out to try and expand the conversation and the theory and the understanding, I that's that seems so important to the work of getting us to a place that we need to be at. So awesome.
I agree. All right. Thank you so
Cool.
much, Carter.
Thank you so much.
All
Take
right.
care, Carlos. We'll talk soon.
Take care. Bye
You
bye.
too. Bye. All right, everybody. So that was an awesome conversation. I'm really glad that I was able to take that time with Carlos today to do this. And I, obviously for anybody that was, that didn't catch this live, you can take a moment to hop back. This will be on our YouTube channel, long form, and you can catch it anytime. So, with that, if you want to just hop over to our Patreon, you can become a monthly supporter of this channel. Sort of keep it going, keep it funded. Right now it's completely independent. We have no other source of income for this. It's purely viewer based and volunteer viewer based too. It's your choice whether or not you want to contribute to it. But I try to continue to make this a free resource for folks, because I don't believe that information should be locked up like that. You can follow us on Twitter. If you want to hop down and hit subscribe, you can hit the little bell for notifications so you know whenever we're going to go live. Tomorrow I've got Anna McGinnis on. She's been really, really involved and a huge part of the discussions here locally. So that's going to be the local show tomorrow. We're going to start that at 11 o'clock. And yeah, so thank you everybody so much for tuning in and catching up with this. And we'll see everybody tomorrow. Hey, take care, okay?